Hi everyone. Welcome to this video. My name is Ansura and I'm a software engineer at Postman. Today we are going to talk about code duplicacy, and this is one problem that I have seen a lot of people, React developer face, especially in the starting of their career. We'll go through. We'll see an example where we'll see the one such example of duplicate code, and we'll talk about the solutions. So let's just quickly go through the application. So you can see that I have created a basically a counter app, and this counter app basically is rendering two counters. And if you go to this two counters, these counters have the logic, a business logic written inside of them, right? So notice this thing that your counter is a component, and this component has a business logic written inside of it, right? And then we are using this, then we have another counter, and it is also having business logic written inside of it, right? So this is basically a classical case of duplicate code. Now some of you may argue with me that, hey, what we can do is that we can basically put this business logic outside and put it inside app.js, and then we can basically pass this logic as a props. That also is fine, but the problem is that your both counter is doing the same job, your business logic is same, you are basically duplicating the code, right? So again, that is also a bad. So the problem is that if you observe the counter 1 and counter 2, both of them are having doing the same job, same stuff, right? Nothing difference here. So the question is that how can we solve this problem, right? So there are three approaches we can follow. There are three solutions here, right? One is render props, which we're going to talk about in this video. Then there is a custom hook in the case if you are using a functional component, and then there is something called a higher order component, short form HOC. So we're going to talk about render props in this video. We're going to solve this problem using a render props. Now the first question that comes to your mind is that what is render props, right? So not going to give you a theoretical answer. Let's basically stick with me, and I'm going to explain you through an example. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a wrapper. Okay, already have wrapper. Let's say, let's actually delete this, or maybe let's say this is going to be a wrapper 1.js, and this one is going to be a class-based component. You can create functional component also, but render props make much more sense in the class-based component, right? We have a custom hook for function component, which I'm gonna explain in another video. So what I'm gonna do is that let's basically set up call the constructor of this. So not gonna call, let's basically create a constructor class, call the super, and we're gonna receive props. Let's call this inside super. Then I'm gonna create a state. So the idea is that this wrapper should contain the business logic as well as it should decide the render props. It should render the render props, right? So I'm going to separate out the whole the business logic as well as the rendering logic, and I'm going to put it inside this wrapper one, so that I'm going to use this wrapper component, and this wrapper component will use we can use this wrapper class component to render different counter components, right? So let's create a state, and inside this state I'm going to put a counter, of course, and we're going to create two function. One is increment. Let me explicitly bind this of increment using a bind function, so that if I'm using it in some other context, it should always point to the wrapper one, this object. So again, decrement. Some of you can argue with me that, hey, we don't need two functions. That is also correct, but for the sake of simplicity, let's stick with this thing, and I'm going to create this increment function, which will simply update my count. So we're going to use set state, update the value of count. The value should be simply whatever that is present in the count. Let's do this +1, and same goes with the decrement. So let me copy paste and update this thing. The only difference is this should decrease this one, right? So you see, I have put the business logic inside the wrapper, right? Now let us see that how we're gonna use this wrapper to basically render the counter, right? Two counters. So for that, let's go inside the app.js and I'm gonna import this wrapper one. Import wrapper one, and I'm gonna get rid of this counter. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna use wrapper one now, and as the name suggests, render props, I'm gonna pass a prop called render here. Now the difference is that this render is a special props, and it will basically it is a function, right, which actually return a JSX, right. A render prop is basically a prop which basically contains a function which should return a JSX. That is the definition, right. Now let us see that how we can use this render props to render both the counters, right. So for that, what I'm going to do is that this render function will actually receive the value of count. It will receive this function called increment, decrement. Let's use shorthand for that. And what we're going to do is that this will actually return a counter, right. So let's do one thing. Let's make it counter, and we don't need, we will basically use a single file, right. We are not going to use duplicate code now, and we can actually pass this count from here on. So let's pass this inc here, and same goes for the decrement. Cool. So what I'm doing is that I'm passing this render pros, which is a function, and this function will return a JSX, right. And what we need to do is that we should receive these props inside the wrapper one, and we should basically render this, right. We should call, we're gonna call this function inside render, so that the render will call this function, it will return the JSX, and then JSX will be basically render inside this wrapper one. So if you go here inside the render function of the wrapper one, I'm gonna check if we have the props or not, render props or not, just to be on the safer side. And if we have it, again you can also validate that this render is a function by using a prop type, not going there. So if we have this render, we can simply call this, and when we are calling it, remember here, when we are calling it, we have to pass these values, right, which is present actually inside the wrapper one. So that's the idea of basically putting the business logic inside the wrapper one, because now we're gonna call this render props from here on. We can pass these values, and accordingly JavaScript React will basically render the counter app with these values. So for that, let's pass this value. So first we're gonna need the count, then we need to pass the increment function, then we need to pass the decrement function, and that's it, right. That's all we had to do, right. So now you can delete this counter too. We don't need this counter too, right. Remember that we only needed counting one counter. You can basically rename it to make much more sense now, and this is how we are doing this. But now we have to change this logic here. This counter is now a bit generic, so it will receive all the values from the props. And what all value it needs, so it need a count, it need a increment, it need a decrement. Now we can render the count, we can attach these functions on the onclicks, and this is all we need. We don't need this one, we don't need this one also, and we can delete this counter too. We don't need this counter 2 at all. Let's get rid of this. So if you go back to the app.js, we have a single wrapper, right, which is basically rendering a counter. Now if we need two counters, all you need to do is that call this wrapper twice, right. So you can see that here you are not duplicating any code, you're simply calling this wrapper one component twice. This wrapper will basically do the setup of setting the state and setting these functions, and then when you're calling it, you're passing this counter application. So no code duplicacy is present. We have put the logic, the business logic in a single component, and then we are rendering the two components from there on. So this would work. So let's see if this is working or not. So for that, let's go and see it in action. So if you go here and do this increase decrease, these are working as expected. So this is how using basically using the concept of render props, we are able to get rid of the duplicate code. So I hope that you are able to understand it. We will see how can we do solve this problem using the context custom hook as well as HOC in the coming videos. So thank you for watching the videos. Bye.